I want to spend a moment comparing India with China. And the interesting thing here is that in the research that you've put out, you're comparing India's growth estimates with that of China. I just want to explain to our viewers what they're going to see on their screen. What you're seeing essentially is where you see negative, where it's below the zero, is where China was growing faster than India, and when we're more than zero is when India is growing faster than China. So from 2024, where Morgan Stanley is estimating that India will grow at 2.8% faster than China, by 2031 India could be growing at 3% more than China. This is a comparison of the real GDP growth rates in the two countries. Whereas in 2008, for example, India was growing at 5.6% less than China. Now, is this something to be happy about and excited about? Because the converse to this is that China has already grown fast, phenomenally. So even if now India is growing faster than China, it's nothing really to be very jubilant about, because they've already reached a scale where they're 5 times the size of our economy.
So Rahul, see, I think when you make this India-China comparison, you need to bear in mind that China has had 30 years of stupendous growth, and it is kind of over now. So growth in China is decelerating very quickly. In fact, this year, China's population will decline, and this is a major drag on their growth rates. On the other hand, India is not going to have a 30-year sweet period. India's sweet period actually lasts a lot longer, because we have much better demographic conditions than China has. So I dare say, and obviously we're not making that forecast because it's so far into the future, but India may still be growing faster than China when you go at the turn of this century, which means that there is a long way ahead for India to catch up with China, and India will eventually catch up with China. The gap will close down quite a lot by the end of this decade, as we have written in our report, and will continue to close.
Do you have a timeline for when you think India could catch up with China by, or is that too difficult to estimate at this moment?
Well, it's a little too far out in the future, so it may not matter to people. A couple of generations may pass, but I don't think it will be, it won't be impossible to think that this happens by, say, 2050 or before that. It depends, of course, also on what happens in China. But China's population decline is very difficult to reverse.
But it also depends to some extent, and I want to understand from your perspective to what extent, on the macroeconomic political stability in India. For example, oftentimes in the past it's been said globally that this is India's moment, and for some reason or the other, India as a country collectively ended up botching up that moment and never turned out to be India's moment. It became South Korea's moment at one time, China's moment at the other, then possibly Vietnam's moment. So all of this, what are the conditions that you're basing your assumptions on?
Yeah, so Rahul, there are plenty of risk factors out there. You very rightly point out India is a democratic place. It has to appoint a government, elect a government every 5 years. There's no guarantee that a majority economic-focused government comes into power. We've had fragmented government, coalition governments with other priorities in the past, during which periods the economy doesn't do well. We also have a difficult global outlook. Remember, when China was growing as fast as it was, global growth was in very good condition. The world is not a very pretty place now. It's got a very high level of debt, and it's aging, which means that it's going to slow down. At a time when India is trying to export more, both services and goods, it is faced with a slowing world. So it's not going to be a straight line. It will be challenging. There will be these challenges along the way. India's domestic economy, I think, will do okay, but the external environment will remain tough. And along the way, there will be political volatility as well. So, yeah, all these forecasts have to be put into context. They do not necessarily pan out the way I'm thinking right now, because I really don't know which risks come when.
No, sure. And that, as we've seen with the pandemic, as we've seen with the Russia-Ukraine war, there can be factors that emerge on the immediate horizon which haven't been anticipated, in black swan events which are impossible to be able to guess. Now, I want to look at the big numbers, because you're estimating that by the end of the next decade, India's GDP will stand at $7.9 trillion in comparison to $3.1 trillion at this moment. How does this compare, Ridham, relative to the claims the government's been making? Because they've been promising a $5 trillion economy for a very long time, and then of course the pandemic upended those estimates. $7.9 trillion by FY32, and a per capita GDP of $5,242 relative to in comparison with $2,278 at this moment. Where would that place India in the hierarchy of global wealth?
So see, in terms of absolute GDP, India will be in the top three. India will be in the top three by 2027. So it doesn't have to wait all the way till 2031. So we're getting there very quickly. In terms of per capita income, it will take a lot longer. So at $5,200, we'll be like a mid-income economy. We'll not be as poor as we are today. Right now, we're a poor country. At $2,200 or $2,300, remember, there are, a very large portion of our population earns subsistence income and is struggling to get roti kapda makan. We'll move out of that period in 10 years. I don't think we'll have too many people in that bracket, and a lot of people will be middle income. So that's, I think, very good news.
No, but these are averages, and averages are deceiving because Mukesh Ambani's income and the poorest person's income then gets averaged out. So is that something that concerns you, growing inequality, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer? Is that something that you factor at all in your research?
So Rahul, actually inequality in India will decline as we get more prosperous. Inequality rises when we are not able to grow GDP. This is the irony, and this is what people need to understand, especially policymakers. The emphasis should be to get the economy to grow faster. It's when the tide lifts, all the boats rise, the smallest boats rise the most. It's not the large boats that benefit the most. So it's important to grow the economy faster to come out of poverty. And at $5,200, we'll have lower, lower differentials amongst the rich and the poor than we have today. There'll be a lot more people who will walk out of poverty. The middle layer of the income pyramid, as we call it, the income pyramid is how we stack up the income. It will actually swell. And there'll be a lot more middle class people in this country. And if I can share the numbers, today we have 60 million people who are classified as middle class households, not people, households. That number will go to 160 million by the end of the decade. So it's good news, actually.
Okay, interesting, because clearly India has some very strong tailwinds that are propelling the India story at this moment, becoming the third largest economy by 2027, and also raising our GDP and contributing to 1/5 of global growth. Those are interesting developments about the transformation that the India story has made in the last 9 years. Morgan Stanley's Managing Director Ridham Desai for joining me on the news track. Thank you very much. Aapke muh mein ghee shakkar. I hope all of what you're saying, just from the perspective of an Indian and being a part of the India story, does indeed come true. Where would that leave our markets if that were to happen? This is not directly in your research, but where would that take our markets to then?
So, Rahul, our markets have done very well over the past 25 years. People don't realize that we're amongst the best performing stock markets in US dollar terms, and I think we'll continue to retain that status over the next 10 years. So as we have made that forecast in our report, we think market capitalization of Indian equities goes from $3.5 trillion to around $10 trillion. And that translates into about 10% dollar compounding of equity returns. That's a very strong number. If we achieve that, India will be the best performing stock market in the world in the coming decade.